G'day mate, my name's Margie and I'm an Australian currently living in America. Today's video, I wanted to talk about why I think that Ludo Studios and Bluey will never, ever do an Australian Day special episode, even though the show is obviously super Australian. But unlike American cartoon shows that will do like a Thanksgiving special or maybe an Independence Day special, there's no way that Bluey's ever gonna do this for the Australia Day special or just an irregular episode. So if you're new to my channel, hi, welcome. I do Australia versus USA content as well as Bluey content. Sometimes I mix those two together. So if you are interested in any of that, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below. And I basically just want to try and break down to you why I think that this is never going to happen. And a lot of it is to do with the episode Teasing and also kind of the episode Flatpack as well. Now, for anyone who maybe is unaware of this, for Bluey in America on Disney+, the episode Teasing doesn't exist. It was pulled from the air. Flatpack was also pulled, but then put back on as well. Same thing in Australia. The episode Teasing was pulled, as was Flatpack, but then later on they were put back on. So why did this happen and what has it got to do with Australia Day? Basically, it's to do with certain words that the writers had chosen and no one on the production picked up on it, that this was actually really offensive to the First Nations of Australia or Aboriginal and Indigenous Australians, and they got called out on it. So the episode Teasing was the one that actually initially got the complaint from a viewer. I'm going to put up on the screen here sort of what happened and what it was about. I'm not going to say the words, but basically Bluey and Bingo were having a bit of a fun time with their dad. They were teasing each other. Dad was calling them different names. Then Bingo decided to call her dad a different name as well, and that's the offensive term that was used. And guess what? When they got this one complaint, or it might have been more complaints, but the article says it was just the one. Guess what they did? The right thing. They took the episode off the air. They changed the words. They put out a statement and apologized for it and then put it back on, which is exactly what we want to see happen when something like this happens. They took accountability. They changed it. They acknowledged it. That's awesome. That's great. That's exactly what we want to happen. So they put it back on the air, but weirdly, it never came back on the air on Disney+. It is on Disney Junior though, and it is available to like purchase on, I think it's Amazon and Apple and things like that. So it is interesting though that Disney never put it back on. Some people think that's because the episode also might have like ideas of bullying in it, but that's a whole other discussion. The same term was also used in Flatpack. They did the same thing. They pulled it, they changed it, they put it back on. So what has this got to do with Australia Day, or the idea of doing a special for Australia Day? Because Bluey has done Christmas specials, Father's Day specials, Easter specials, so why not do like the most Aussiest of Aussie days with it being a show about Australian culture? Well, it's basically to do with the history of Australia Day, also known as Invasion Day, Survival Day, or the Day of Mourning. And I'm guessing basically from those names that you might have a bit of a hint as to why this would be really controversial. So for anyone who is not from Australia who's watching this, I'm gonna try and, as best I can, give a breakdown sort of the background of this in, I would say, a more simplified version, but it is not a simple topic, and I want that to be known. There are a lot of other videos out on YouTube that go into details about the major issues with this, how long it's been going on for, everything like that. I'm just gonna give like the very simple breakdown of it so you have the idea of it, as well as perspectives not just from myself, because I am not a First Nation Australian. I am a third generation immigrant from Australia. So I think it's very important to have that perspective as well. So as I mentioned before, Australia Day is kind of like a mix of, say, Thanksgiving or Independence Day from America. It's a day that a lot of people celebrate. However, it is a day with a really awful history attached to it. So for myself, growing up in Australia, honestly, I never really celebrated Australia Day while I was going through school because it was never like a massive thing or like a big deal. It was right at the beginning of our school year. It was like the first week back at school. Instead of going to school for 5 days, you went to school for 4 days because there was a public holiday. That was all it meant to me. Literally, for the first 18 years of my life, that's all Australia Day meant was, oh, it's a day off school. Not a whole lot going on there. I don't remember learning a lot about it because, again, we only just came back to school, so it's not like they would do like a big thing about it. So it didn't really mean that much to me. But from when I was 18 to, say, the age of 26, however, it did have a little bit more meaning, and that was just the fact that it was a day off work, a day to meet up with friends, have a barbecue, get drunk during the day basically, and be super patriotic. We're talking Australia Day thongs or flip-flops, as you'd say in different countries, Australia Day towels, Australia Day tattoos. You would listen to the Hottest 100 countdown from Triple J. Like, it was just a day to feel really, really Aussie, because we don't really do that during the year. We don't put up flags for Australia or anything like that. So it was sort of that one day where like you feel like you get into that kind of patriotic spirit. And that's what it meant for me. That's all of it. Like, I honestly didn't know any of the history behind it. I was aware that it was like the day that Australia, or like Captain Cook came to Australia. That was honestly like all the knowledge I had. And I never thought to actually make the effort to look into the history behind it. I was in a very seclusive little bubble. It just never appeared. Social media wasn't a really massive thing back then. So again, it's not like you would see a lot of stuff about it like you would now on TikTok about Thanksgiving or Independence Day and the issues behind those. So I think that's got a lot to do with also why I was so ignorant and just never thought to look into it, which I think is something that has happened to a lot of Australians as well. And it's really sad because we should know a lot more about it, and we should understand a lot more about it as well, because there's a reason why it's called Invasion Day and Survival Day. So I want to play a clip from First Nation people from Australia and their thoughts and process or views, I guess, on what Australia Day means to them.
People celebrating the day that your people got slaughtered and invaded, and the day that caused all that destruction and all that suffering to very peaceful people.
For a lot of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders, it's a day of mourning.
It's the day that marks the beginning of the massacres.
It's celebrating rape, it's celebrating murders.
I think that our country is a great country and it's beautiful, and there are a lot of opportunities here. I feel that celebrating Australia Day on the 26th of January is wrong. That doesn't make any sense.
It's truly a celebration of what we are as a nation, and we need to include the First Nations of this country.
A day that we could all celebrate.
I'll help you celebrate it if you like.
We're quite inclusive people, so we just want to be included as well.
So as you can see from that, it's not exactly a fun day for them like it was for me when I was 18 to 26 years old, before I actually clicked a light bulb and bothered to learn about this. So I'm gonna try and give this like a very short history breakdown just so you have an idea. I got my notes here, so I just don't want to get anything wrong. But basically, 26th of January, it's the day that marks the 1788 landing of the First Fleet in Sydney. It also marks the beginning of the British sovereignty over Australia, or the colonisation of Australia, the invasion of Australia, because there were people living here before the British came over. So that's why the date initially is quite significant, because that's where it all started, or where it all began. It was actually a day of celebration in New South Wales, which is where Sydney is, since about 1808, so about that's like 20-ish years later. And this was celebrated mostly by the convicts who were brought to Australia. So by 1808, the date was being used by the colony's immigrants, especially the emancipated convicts, to celebrate their love of the land they lived in with drinking and merriment. This is honestly basically what Australia Day still is for a lot of Australians. It's a day of drinking and merriment. That's about the only thing that realistically continued all the way through. So that's what a lot of people did during this time. It wasn't until about 150 years later that this day actually became official, and that was in 1935 when all states and territories actually marked this day as Australia Day. However, it's very important to note that at this point of time, Aboriginal and Indigenous Australians were not considered citizens of Australia. Maybe that you can understand that that is just so dumb. So dumb. Like, this is meant to be the day for Australia, but the actual Australians aren't even classified as people and can't celebrate either. I'm sure you can already understand now some of the issues with this day. So a few years later, in 1938, was actually the first time that there were sort of really big protests around Australia by First Nations people protesting this day and calling it a day of mourning as well. And basically, since 1938, every year there have been protests against this day. And honestly, it wasn't until 1994, so really recently, that this day actually became a public holiday where we get the day off work or the day off school. The officiality around it has not been going on for very long, realistically. Now, a lot of the protests happen down south in Sydney and Melbourne, but of course there are other ones as well, up north in Brisbane and Darwin and over on the west coast in Perth as well. But the majority of it, because the majority of Australians live down south, that's where a lot of the protests happen. And a lot of local governments in Sydney and Melbourne have actually tried to push and not celebrate this day anymore, which I think is fantastic, because there are a range of other days that are much better suited so that every single Australian could celebrate together.
It's like somebody that comes into your house, does horrible things to your family, and they're like, dude, we're gonna have a party and have a barbecue and listen to Triple J. Yeah, and we're gonna put it on the date we turned up. And you're like, that's kind of sadistic, man. Like, why would you do that?
The Change the Date movement has officially been going on since 1999. And the most popular date is basically May 8th, which when you say it, May 8, mate is a very Aussie word. It's also a bit of a British word too. But it's a day that doesn't really have any history. There's nothing negative associated with it. It's a day that everyone together could celebrate. So on the really simplified, as I said, the basic level of understanding this is you've got all of that negative history trying to be celebrated on this day that really is only beneficial to people who were privileged from the beginning. So you can see why this would be a really big issue. Now, what has that got to do with Bluey and Ludo Studios? Well, as I said before, the offensive terms that they had used in the episodes Teasing and Flatpack, they were offensive to First Nation people of Australia. So Bluey and the team behind it, they're aware. They don't want to offend anyone. They want everyone to love and enjoy this show, which makes me think that there is no way that they would ever do a special about January 26th or even release an episode on January 26th with even like a hint towards it, because it would offend so many people and the original owners of the land in Australia. There's absolutely no way that they were ever going to do that, because they've already shown that they respect their opinions and their feelings by removing both of these episodes and changing the words in them before re-releasing, making that apology statement. I honestly think if Bluey was ever to do an episode to say, like, showcase the Australia-isms or the patriotic side of Australia, it's probably going to be an Anzac Day episode. They've already shown in Bluey's house the Victoria Cross, that Grandad also was part of the army as well, or the military. So I think if anything, they would probably show an episode about that day and showing the patriotism of Australia through that instead. But as I said before, there is a load of other videos that go way more into depth about the issues with Australia Day. So if you're interested in any of those, I'm gonna put links to them down in the description box below. But that's basically my thoughts on why I don't think there's ever going to be an Australia Day Bluey episode. But what do you think? Do you think that they would ever do something like this? Are there any other days that you think that maybe they might do instead, or that they might never do? I know Halloween has like a very, especially like on Facebook groups, it's very controversial between whether or not they would ever do an episode for that. But let me know what you think down below in the comments. I will be releasing the Magic Xylophone review and breakdown this week as well, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell for notifications so you know when that's coming out as well. And otherwise, I will see you all in another video. Mwah! Bye!